On my 60th birthday, I caught my son-in-law and my wife cheating. I called my daughter to see. She only winked and said, "Relax, the main event's about to start." No one believed what showed up on the screen next. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought my 60th birthday would end with me standing in my own bedroom doorway watching my wife of 25 years tangled in bed sheets with my son-in-law. But there I was, frozen like a statue, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode right there in my chest. The party downstairs was still going strong. I could hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the gentle hum of conversations drifting up through the floorboards. My colleagues from the law firm, neighbors we'd known for decades, Joyce's book club friends, all celebrating what was supposed to be a milestone in my life. Instead, I was witnessing the destruction of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I had come upstairs to grab my reading glasses from the nightstand. Joyce had insisted I give a speech later, something about thanking everyone for being part of our journey together. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Michael, my daughter Sarah's husband of 8 years, was supposed to be downstairs helping with the catering setup. Instead, he was in my bed, his hands running through my wife's graying hair like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Joyce saw me first. Her blue eyes, the same ones that had sparkled at me on our wedding day, went wide with something between shock and defiance. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She didn't cry out or try to explain. She just stared at me with this strange, almost relieved expression, like she was glad the charade was finally over. Michael turned around slowly, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Not shame, not guilt, but irritation, like I was interrupting something that was none of my business. He was 32 years old, barely older than Sarah, with those piercing green eyes that had charmed our whole family when she first brought him home. Now, those same eyes looked at me with barely concealed contempt. "Robert," Joyce said, her voice steady in a way that chilled me to the bone. She pulled the sheet up to her shoulders, but didn't look away. "We need to talk." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What do you say when your entire world crumbles in the span of 5 seconds? When the woman you've loved for a quarter of a century, the woman you've built a life with, shared dreams with, is lying naked with the man your daughter calls husband? Michael swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for his pants. "This isn't what you think," he said, but his voice carried no conviction. It was the kind of lie you tell when you don't even care if anyone believes it. "Get out," I finally managed, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "Both of you, get out of my house." Joyce stood up then, wrapping the sheet around herself like some kind of twisted toga. "Robert, you're being dramatic. We can discuss this like adults." Dramatic? 25 years of marriage, and she was calling me dramatic for being upset about finding her in bed with our son-in-law. I felt something break inside me, something fundamental that I knew would never heal properly. "Sarah," I said, the word falling out of my mouth before I could stop it. "Does Sarah know?" Michael was buttoning his shirt now, taking his sweet time like he was getting dressed for another day at the office. "Sarah's downstairs," he said casually. "Maybe you should go talk to her." The way he said it made my skin crawl. There was something in his tone, something knowing and cruel that I couldn't quite place. It was like he was enjoying this, like my pain was entertainment for him. I stumbled backward out of the room, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The hallway stretched in front of me like a tunnel, and I could hear my own breathing, harsh and ragged in my ears. Behind me, I heard Joyce's voice, low and urgent, talking to Michael, but I couldn't make out the words. The stairs seemed endless as I made my way down to the party. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. When I reached the living room, the normalcy of it all hit me like a slap. People were still laughing, still enjoying themselves, still celebrating my birthday like nothing had happened. Like my life hadn't just imploded upstairs. I spotted Sarah across the room, standing by the fireplace with a small group of my law firm partners. She was wearing that blue dress I'd complimented earlier, the one that reminded me of her mother at that age. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she was smiling and nodding at something one of them was saying. She looked so normal, so innocent, so completely unaware of what I'd just discovered. Or did she? As I watched her, something in her posture struck me as odd. There was a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. She glanced toward the stairs, then back at her conversation, but I caught the movement. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I started walking toward her, weaving through clusters of guests who kept trying to stop me, wanting to shake my hand or wish me happy birthday. I smiled and nodded automatically, my face moving through the motions while my mind reeled. Mrs. Henderson from next door grabbed my arm and started telling me about her grandson's college acceptance, but I barely heard a word she said. When I finally reached Sarah, she turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying that same strange quality I'd heard in Michael's tone upstairs. "There you are. We were just talking about your speech." "Sarah, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice low. The partners were still standing there, listening, and I didn't want to make a scene in front of them. She tilted her head slightly, studying my face. "Is everything okay? You look a little pale." Before I could answer, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Joyce and Michael were coming down, both of them looking perfectly composed, perfectly normal. Joyce had changed into a different dress, a red one I'd never seen before, and her hair was freshly combed. Michael had that easy smile on his face, the one that had won over our entire family years ago. They moved through the crowd like nothing had happened, accepting congratulations and making small talk. Joyce even kissed my cheek when she passed by, her lips cold against my skin. "The main event is about to start," Sarah said suddenly, her voice carrying across the room in a way that made several people turn to look at her. She was holding a remote control in her hand, pointing it toward the large television mounted above the fireplace. I stared at her, confused. We hadn't planned any main event. The party was supposed to be simple. Dinner, cake, maybe a few toasts. But Sarah was moving with purpose now, her previous nervousness replaced by something that looked almost like anticipation. "What main event?" I asked. But she was already pressing buttons on the remote. The television flickered to life, casting a blue glow across the darkened living room. The conversations gradually died down as people turned their attention to the screen. I felt Joyce move closer to me, her presence like a cold draft against my side. Sarah looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach clench. It wasn't innocence or confusion or concern for her father's obvious distress. It was something else entirely, something that made me realize this night was far from over. As I stood there staring at the blank television screen, waiting for whatever Sarah had planned, my mind started racing backward through the past months, maybe even years. How long had this been going on right under my nose? How many signs had I missed or chosen to ignore? The first thing that came flooding back was Joyce's behavior over the past 6 months. She'd become distant in ways I'd attributed to her going through menopause. The woman who used to greet me at the door with a kiss and questions about my day had gradually become someone who barely looked up from her book when I walked into a room. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics: who was picking up groceries, when the plumber was coming, whether we should refinance the mortgage. I remembered one particular evening in March when I tried to initiate intimacy. We'd been lying in bed and I'd reached for her hand, started stroking her arm the way I had for decades. She'd pulled away so sharply you'd have thought I'd burned her. "I'm tired, Robert," she'd said, turning her back to me. "Maybe tomorrow." But tomorrow never came, and after a while I stopped reaching for her altogether. Then there was Michael's sudden interest in our family finances. It had started innocently enough. He was working as a financial advisor after all, so when he offered to help us restructure our retirement portfolio, it seemed natural. But looking back now, I could see how calculated it had been. He'd started coming over on Sunday afternoons, supposedly to spend time with Sarah and help around the house, but he always ended up in my study, asking detailed questions about my investments, my life insurance policies, even the specifics of our estate planning. "Dad, you really should consider updating your will," he'd said just last month, sitting in the leather chair across from my desk like he owned the place. Some of these beneficiary designations are outdated. What if something happened to Joyce first? You'd want Sarah to be protected, right? I'd found it thoughtful at the time, even touching that he cared so much about our family's financial security. Now the memory made my skin crawl. How many of those Sunday afternoon visits had ended with him upstairs in my bedroom with my wife while I was downstairs organizing paperwork he'd suggested I update? Sarah had been acting strangely too, but in a different way than her mother. Where Joyce had become distant and cold, Sarah had become almost hyper-vigilant around me. She'd started calling more frequently, dropping by the house at odd hours, asking questions about my health, my work, my relationship with Joyce. At the time, I'd thought she was just being a caring daughter, maybe worried about us getting older. But now I wondered if she'd been gathering information for some other purpose. There was one conversation in particular that stuck out now. It was about 3 weeks ago, and she'd come over for dinner. Joyce had cooked her famous pot roast, the one she used to make every Sunday when Sarah was growing up. We were sitting around the dining room table, and Sarah kept glancing between Joyce and Michael with a strange expression on her face. "Mom," she'd said suddenly, right in the middle of a story Michael was telling about his latest client, "do you remember when you used to make this pot roast every Sunday? How Dad would always say it was the best part of his week." Joyce had looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair and avoiding eye contact with me. "That was a long time ago, honey. People change, tastes change." "Do they?" Sarah had asked, and there was something sharp in her voice that I hadn't understood then. "I mean, some things stay the same, don't they? Like loyalty, like commitment, like the promises we make to the people we love." Michael had cleared his throat and changed the subject to something about interest rates, but I'd caught the way he and Joyce had looked at each other. It was quick, just a flash of something that might have been warning or fear, but it was there. And the phone calls. God, how had I been so blind about the phone calls? Joyce's phone had been buzzing constantly for months, but she'd become incredibly secretive about it. She who used to answer calls on speakerphone while cooking dinner, who used to hand me the phone when her sister called because Robert, Helen wants to say hi, had started taking every call in another room. When I'd asked about it once, she'd said it was just book club drama, nothing that would interest me. One evening in April, I'd walked into the kitchen while she was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. The moment she saw me, she'd said, "I have to go. I'll call you back later," and hung up immediately. "Who was that?" I'd asked, opening the refrigerator and pretending to look for something. "Nobody," she'd said too quickly. "Just Mary from book club. You know how she gossips." But I'd seen the name on her phone screen before she'd turned it away. It wasn't Mary. It was Michael. How many times after that had I walked into a room to find Joyce quickly ending a call or closing her laptop? How many times had Michael shown up at our house when I wasn't expecting him, claiming he was just in the neighborhood or had forgotten something the last time he was over? There were the business trips too. Joyce had never been one to travel much, but over the past year, she'd started going on these mysterious weekend getaways with the girls from book club. She'd come back tanned and relaxed, with stories about spa treatments and wine tastings, but she never brought back any of the usual souvenirs or took any pictures. When I'd suggested joining her on one of these trips, maybe making it a romantic weekend for just the two of us, she'd looked at me like I'd suggested burning down the house. "These are girls' trips, Robert," she'd said. "You wouldn't enjoy the things we do. Trust me, you'd be bored." But the worst part, the thing that made my chest ache even now, as I stood in my living room surrounded by birthday party guests, was how they'd made me doubt myself. When I'd started noticing the distance between Joyce and me, when I'd begun to feel like a stranger in my own home, they'd convinced me it was my imagination. "Dad, you work too much," Sarah would say when I mentioned feeling disconnected from Joyce. "Mom's just giving you space to focus on your career. She's always been supportive like that." And Michael, with his easy charm and financial expertise, had a way of making me feel like an old man who didn't understand the modern world. "Robert, you've got to learn to relax," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder like we were old friends. "Joyce is a strong, independent woman. She doesn't need you hovering over her every move." They'd gaslit me so effectively that I'd started questioning my own perceptions. When Joyce would come home from one of her mysterious trips and barely acknowledge my presence, I'd tell myself I was being needy. When Michael would spend hours alone with her while I was at work discussing financial strategies, I'd tell myself I was being paranoid. They'd made me feel like the problem in my own marriage. Standing there now, waiting for whatever Sarah was about to reveal on that television screen, I felt the full weight of my own blindness. How long had my wife and son-in-law been laughing at me behind my back? How many intimate moments had they shared while I was working late at the office, believing I was providing for my family? How many lies had I swallowed because I'd wanted so desperately to believe that the people I loved most in the world actually loved me back? The remote control trembled slightly in Sarah's hand as she pointed it at the television. Around us, the party guests had grown quiet, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Joyce was standing near the kitchen doorway, her face pale, but her chin raised defiantly. Michael was beside her, that same irritated expression on his face that I'd seen in the bedroom upstairs. And Sarah was looking at me with something in her eyes that I was finally beginning to recognize. Not innocence, not confusion, but knowledge. The kind of knowledge that comes from watching and waiting and planning for exactly the right moment to reveal a truth that will change everything. The television screen flickered to life, and suddenly I was staring at my own bedroom. Not as it looked now, but as it had appeared 3 weeks ago on a Thursday afternoon. The timestamp in the corner read 2:47 p.m., and I remembered that day clearly because I'd been in court all afternoon, defending a client in a custody case that had run longer than expected. On the screen, Joyce was sitting on the edge of our bed, still in her bathrobe, talking on the phone. The audio was crystal clear, and her voice filled the living room with an intimacy that made every guest lean forward slightly. "He's so predictable," Joyce was saying, and I recognized the contemptuous tone I'd been hearing more and more lately, though I'd never understood it was directed at me. "Robert thinks if he works late enough, makes enough money, everything will just magically fix itself. He has no idea what's really going on in his own house." The person on the other end of the call was speaking, but I couldn't hear their voice. Joyce laughed, a sound that was nothing like the warm laughter I'd fallen in love with decades ago. This was cold, calculating. "Michael will be here in 20 minutes, she continued. "Robert's secretary called and said the hearing got postponed until 5, so we have plenty of time. Yes, I know we need to be more careful, but honestly, at this point, I don't think he'd notice if we did it right in front of him." Around me, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from several party guests. Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her chest. My law partner, Jim, was staring at the screen with his mouth slightly open, but I couldn't look away from Joyce's face, couldn't stop listening to her voice, as she continued to destroy whatever was left of my marriage. "The timing has to be perfect," she was saying now, standing up and moving to the window. "Sarah says the new will should be ready by next month. Once Robert signs those papers, we'll have everything we need." Michael's been brilliant about positioning himself as the family financial advisor. Robert trusts him completely. The scene on the screen shifted then, and suddenly we were watching a different day, a different conversation. This time, it was Michael, sitting in my study, talking to someone on speakerphone. I could see my desk in the background, the family photos, the awards from the Bar Association, all the trappings of the life I'd built that they were apparently planning to steal. "The old man is completely clueless," Michael was saying, and his voice carried none of the warmth and respect he'd always shown me in person. "He actually thanked me last week for helping him optimize his portfolio. If he only knew I was optimizing it for us." The voice on the other end was clearer this time, and with a sickening jolt, I realized it was Joyce. "How much longer do you think we need to wait?" she was asking. "Not long," Michael replied, leaning back in my chair like he owned it. "Sarah's been documenting his declining mental capacity for months. A few more incidents of forgetfulness, maybe some confusion about his medications, and we can start the process of having him declared incompetent. Once I have power of attorney, we can liquidate everything without him even knowing." I felt the room spin around me. Declining mental capacity? I was 60 years old, not 90. I'd never shown any signs of cognitive decline, never had any issues with my memory or judgment. But as I stood there listening to my son-in-law discuss my future, like I was already dead, I started to remember things, small things. Times when Sarah had corrected me about conversations I was sure I'd had. Times when Joyce had looked at me with concern when I'd forgotten some minor detail. Times when Michael had gently suggested I might be working too hard, might need to slow down. They'd been setting me up for months, maybe years. They'd been creating a narrative of an aging man losing his grip on reality. And I'd been so trusting, so grateful for their concern, that I'd never questioned it. The screen changed again, and now I was looking at financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies, all the papers Michael had helped me organize over the past year. But these weren't copies of my actual documents. These were forgeries with Michael's name listed as primary beneficiary on accounts that should have been going to Sarah, with Joyce listed as having power of attorney that I'd never granted her. Jesus Christ, Jim muttered behind me, and I realized my law partner was reading the documents with a professional eye. Robert, these are fraudulent. This is elaborate financial elder abuse. But I still couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing, because the screen was showing me something else now, something that made my knees nearly buckle. It was a video of Sarah sitting in what looked like a coffee shop talking to someone across from her. The camera angle was wrong to see who she was with, but I could hear her voice clearly. "I know this is hard to watch, Dad," she was saying. And I realized with a shock that she was talking directly to the camera, directly to me. "I know you're standing in our living room right now, surrounded by people who care about you, watching your whole world fall apart. But I need you to see everything. I need you to understand how long this has been going on and how close they came to destroying you completely." The coffee shop scene faded, and suddenly Sarah was there on screen in what I recognized as her own living room, the one I'd helped her and Michael pick out when they'd bought their house 5 years ago. But this Sarah looked different, older, more serious, with a hardness in her eyes I'd never seen before. 3 months ago, she began, speaking directly into the camera, I discovered that my husband was having an affair with my mother. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was finding out that they weren't just betraying you emotionally and physically. They were planning to steal everything you've worked for your entire life. I felt Joyce move beside me, heard her sharp intake of breath, but I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at anything except my daughter's face on that screen, telling me truths I wasn't sure I was strong enough to hear. Michael came home one night in February, drunk and bragging, Sarah continued. He thought I was asleep, but I heard him on the phone with Mom. He was laughing about how easy you were to manipulate, how grateful you were for his help with your finances. He said you were like a lamb being led to slaughter, too trusting to see what was right in front of your face. The scene shifted again, and now I was looking at bank records, real ones this time. My accounts, showing systematic transfers that I'd never authorized, gradual movements of money into accounts I'd never opened. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, amounts large enough to matter, but small enough to escape notice if you weren't looking carefully. They've already stolen $47,000 from you, Dad, Sarah's voice continued as the numbers scrolled across the screen. They were planning to take everything, the house, your retirement accounts, even your life insurance. Michael had convinced Mom that once they had control of your finances, they could move you into a care facility and live in the house together. A care facility. They were planning to have me institutionalized so they could steal my life and live it together. The betrayal was so complete, so overwhelming, that I felt something fundamental break inside me. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered beyond repair, but my faith in my own judgment, my ability to trust anyone ever again. "I know you're wondering why I didn't tell you sooner," Sarah said, and it was like she was reading my mind. I thought about it every day, but I knew they'd just deny it, gaslight you, make you think you were imagining things. They're both very good at manipulation, Dad. They've had years of practice. So instead, I decided to gather evidence, real evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away. The screen went black for a moment, and then Sarah appeared again, this time sitting in what I recognized as a lawyer's office. "I hired a private investigator," she said. "I installed hidden cameras in your house. I'm sorry for the invasion of privacy, but it was the only way to document what they were doing. I consulted with elder abuse attorneys, forensic accountants, even a psychiatrist who specializes in gaslighting and psychological manipulation. I built a case, Dad, a real case that will hold up in court and make sure they pay for what they've tried to do to you." Behind me, I heard Michael's voice, tight with panic. "Sarah, you crazy bitch, turn this off right now." But Sarah wasn't there to turn anything off. She was on the screen telling me things I needed to hear, revealing a conspiracy that had been unfolding in my own home while I'd been blind to all of it. "The documents Michael showed you about updating your will," Sarah continued, "they were fake. The real documents would have transferred everything to a trust controlled by him and Mom. The declining mental capacity they've been documenting, all fabricated. I have recordings of them discussing how to make you seem confused and forgetful, how to create incidents that would support their narrative." I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Jim standing beside me, his face grim with professional concern. "Robert," he said quietly, "we need to call the police. This is criminal fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. These people need to be arrested." "Oh," but I couldn't respond to Jim, couldn't acknowledge the growing murmur of shocked conversation around me, because Sarah was still talking, and I needed to hear every word. "I love you, Dad," she said, her voice softer now, more like the little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories. "I know this is devastating. I know it feels like your whole life has been a lie, but it hasn't. You're a good man who trusted the wrong people. That's not a character flaw, it's what makes you human. And now that you know the truth, you can protect yourself. You can fight back. You can make sure they never hurt you or anyone else ever again." The screen went black, and the living room fell into complete silence. 60 people, all staring at the television, all trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Then, slowly, heads began to turn toward Joyce and Michael, who were both standing frozen near the kitchen doorway like deer caught in headlights. And for the first time since I'd walked into that bedroom an hour ago, I felt something other than devastation and betrayal. I felt rage. The silence in the room was deafening. 60 people stood frozen, their eyes moving between the blank television screen and the two people who had just been exposed as conspirators in the most elaborate betrayal any of us had ever witnessed. Joyce was pressed against the kitchen door frame, her face drained of all color, while Michael stood beside her with his hands clenched into fists, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't say. Then Sarah walked through the front door. She must have been waiting outside, timing her entrance for exactly this moment. She looked calm, composed, nothing like the devastated daughter I might have expected after orchestrating the public destruction of her own mother and husband. She was carrying a manila folder and what looked like a legal briefcase, and when she saw me standing there in the middle of the crowd, she gave me a small, sad smile. "Hi, Dad," she said, as if she was just arriving for a normal birthday party. "I'm sorry I'm late." "Sarah." The word came out of my mouth like a croak. I felt like I'd been turned inside out, every emotion I'd ever experienced hitting me at once. "What? How did you—" She set the briefcase down on the coffee table and opened the manila folder. "I've been working on this for 6 months," she said, her voice steady but tired. "Ever since I found Mom's phone in Michael's car and saw the text messages between them." Joyce found her voice then, pushing herself away from the doorframe. "Sarah, you don't understand what you've done," she said, but her voice was shaking. "This is going to destroy our family." Sarah looked at her with an expression I'd never seen on my daughter's face before, complete, utter contempt. "Our family?" she repeated. "What family? The one where you were planning to have Dad declared incompetent so you and my husband could steal his life savings? That family?" "It's not what it looks like," Michael said, finally speaking up. His voice was different now, no longer the smooth, confident tone he'd used with me for years. "There are things you don't understand, Sarah. Your father has been showing signs of confusion, memory problems. We were trying to protect him." "You protect him?" Sarah's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composure I'd seen. By forging legal documents, by stealing money from his accounts, by planning to put him in a nursing home so you could move into his house? She pulled a thick stack of papers from the folder and held them up. I have copies of everything, Michael. Every forged document, every unauthorized transaction, every recording of you and Mom planning to destroy my father's life. I've already turned copies over to the district attorney, the state attorney general, and the FBI's white-collar crime unit. The FBI. The words hit the room like a physical force. Several people gasped, and I saw Mrs. Henderson actually take a step backward. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was federal criminal conspiracy. Joyce's legs seemed to give out then, and she sank into one of the dining room chairs. "Sarah, please," she whispered. "I'm your mother." "No," Sarah said, her voice flat. "A mother protects her children and their father. A mother doesn't conspire to steal from her own family. You're a stranger to me now." I was still trying to process everything, still trying to understand how my quiet, gentle daughter had orchestrated such an elaborate investigation. "Sarah," I said, when did you figure out?" She turned to me, and I saw tears in her eyes for the first time since she'd walked in. "Remember that Sunday in February when I came over for dinner? When I kept asking weird questions about your memory and your health?" I nodded, remembering how odd she'd seemed that night. Michael had come home drunk the night before, bragging to someone on the phone about how easy you were to manipulate. I heard him talking about getting power of attorney, about liquidating your assets. At first I thought he was just drunk and talking nonsense, but then I started paying attention to other things. The way Mom would change the subject whenever I asked about you. The way Michael always seemed to know details about your finances that you'd never shared with me. The way you started seeming confused about conversations I knew you'd had. She sat down on the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "I hired a private investigator the next week. A woman named Detective Martinez who specializes in elder abuse cases. She helped me install hidden cameras in your house. I'm sorry, Dad, but it was the only way to document what they were doing when you weren't there." "Hidden cameras," Michael repeated, his face going even paler. "You've been spying on us for 6 months. "I've been protecting my father," Sarah shot back, "something his wife and son-in-law should have been doing instead of plotting to rob him blind." She pulled out another set of documents. "Detective Martinez also helped me trace the financial fraud. They've stolen $47,000 from you so far, Dad, but they were just getting started. The plan was to transfer another $200,000 into accounts they controlled. Then use those forged power of attorney documents to liquidate your retirement accounts and sell the house." $200,000. The number made me dizzy. That was nearly half of my life savings, money I'd been carefully accumulating for 30 years so Joyce and I could have a comfortable retirement. Money I'd planned to leave to Sarah when we died. "Show him the nursing home brochures," Sarah said to Joyce, her voice deadly quiet. "Show him the ones you and Michael picked out for him." Joyce's face crumpled. "Sarah, please don't do this." "Show him," Sarah repeated. With shaking hands, Joyce reached into her purse and pulled out several glossy brochures. Even from across the room, I could see they were for assisted living facilities, places with names like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Care Center, the kind of places where families put elderly relatives when they couldn't or wouldn't care for them anymore. "They were planning to have you committed within the next 3 months, Sarah said, watching my face as I stared at those brochures. Michael found one about 40 minutes away that accepts patients with moderate cognitive decline. The plan was to gradually increase the incidence of confusion and forgetfulness until they could convince a doctor you weren't competent to live independently. I felt something break loose inside me then, a dam bursting after holding back too much pressure for too long. "You were going to put me in a home," I said, looking directly at Joyce. "You were going to steal my money, move my son-in-law into my house, and warehouse me somewhere until I died." "Robert, it's not like that," Joyce said, but her voice carried no conviction. "Then what is it like?" I asked, my voice getting louder. "Explain to me what it's like, Joyce. Explain to me how planning to have me declared incompetent so you can steal my life savings is somehow not exactly what it looks like." She couldn't answer. She just sat there, tears running down her face, looking like a woman who'd been caught in the most elaborate lie of her life. Michael, meanwhile, was looking around the room like a trapped animal. "This is insane," he said to the crowd of guests who were still standing there, witnessing the complete destruction of my family. "Sarah's having some kind of breakdown. She's making all of this up." "Really?" Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Because I have hours of recordings of you and Mom planning this whole thing. Would you like me to play some of them for everyone?" "No," Michael said quickly. Too quickly. "I thought not." Sarah looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the guests. "I want everyone here to understand what you've witnessed tonight. This isn't a family argument or a misunderstanding. This is documented criminal fraud and elder abuse. My mother and my husband conspired for months to steal from my father and destroy his life. They came very close to succeeding." Jim, my law partner, stepped forward. "Robert, we need to call the police right now. This is a criminal matter." "I already have," Sarah said. "Detective Martinez is on her way, along with officers from the Financial Crimes Unit. They should be here in about 10 minutes. The police. They were actually going to arrest Joyce and Michael at my birthday party, in front of all my friends and colleagues. Part of me felt sick at the thought, but another part, a part I didn't recognize, felt a fierce satisfaction. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "why didn't you just tell me what you suspected? Why go to all this trouble to expose them publicly?" She looked at me with infinite sadness in her eyes. "Because they're both master manipulators, Dad. If I had just told you what I suspected, they would have convinced you I was lying or jealous or having problems in my marriage. They would have turned you against me, isolated you even more, and then accelerated their timeline. This was the only way to make sure you saw the truth with your own eyes, with witnesses present, with evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away." I realized she was right. Even now, after everything I'd seen and heard, part of me wanted to believe there was some other explanation, some misunderstanding that could make sense of all this without requiring me to accept that the two people closest to me had been systematically destroying my life for months. "Besides," Sarah continued, "they needed to face consequences, real consequences. If I'd just exposed them privately, they would have found another victim, someone else's elderly father or grandfather. This way, everyone knows what they are. Everyone knows what they're capable of." In the distance, I could hear sirens. The police were coming to arrest my wife and son-in-law at my 60th birthday party, and somehow, that felt like exactly what should happen. Justice served at the same table where they'd been serving me lies for months. Joyce stood up unsteadily, looking around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, but she wasn't talking to me or Sarah. She was talking to the crowd, making one last desperate play for sympathy. "Yes, you did," Sarah said quietly. "You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just never meant to get caught." The sirens grew louder until they stopped right outside our house. Through the living room windows, I could see the red and blue lights flashing across the faces of my birthday party guests, casting everything in an eerie, surreal glow. Within moments, there was a firm knock on the front door. Sarah walked over and opened it, greeting the officers like she'd been expecting them all along. Detective Martinez was a small, compact woman in her 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes that immediately took in the scene. Behind her were two uniformed officers and a man in a suit who introduced himself as Agent Phillips from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "Mr. Holloway," Detective Martinez said, approaching me with a kind but professional demeanor, "I'm Detective Martinez. Your daughter has been working with our department for several months now. I understand this evening has been very difficult for you." I nodded, still struggling to find my voice. The reality of police officers in my living room at my birthday party, there to arrest my wife and son-in-law, felt like something out of a nightmare. "We're going to need to speak with Mrs. Joyce Holloway and Mr. Michael Patterson," Agent Phillips said, consulting a notebook. "Are they both here?" Joyce was still sitting in the dining room chair, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Michael was standing near the kitchen, his face a mixture of defiance and panic. Neither of them moved. "Joyce Holloway and Michael Patterson," Detective Martinez called out. "You're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, elder abuse, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." As she read them their rights, I watched my wife of 25 years and the man I'd considered a son slowly realize that their carefully constructed plan had not only failed, but was about to destroy their lives. Joyce started crying, not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use so often over the years, but the desperate, ugly crying of someone whose world was collapsing. Michael tried a different approach. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "Sarah is obviously having some kind of mental breakdown. She's made all of this up. Check my records. I'm a licensed financial advisor. Everything I did for Robert was completely legal and above board." Agent Phillips looked up from his notebook. "Mr. Patterson, we've been investigating your activities for the past 3 months. We've documented unauthorized access to Mr. Holloway's accounts, forged signatures on legal documents, and recorded conversations detailing your conspiracy to defraud an elderly person. I'd suggest you save your explanations for your lawyer." The uniformed officers moved forward to handcuff them both. Joyce looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading for something, forgiveness, understanding, one last chance to explain everything away. But I couldn't give her what she was looking for. I couldn't even look at her directly. "Robert," she said as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, "please don't let them do this. You know me. You know, I would never hurt you." But I didn't know her. That was the devastating truth I was finally accepting. The woman I'd been married to for 25 years, the woman I'd shared a bed with and built a life with, was a stranger to me. Maybe she always had been. Michael was less gracious in defeat. "This is your fault," he snarled at Sarah as they led him toward the door. "You destroyed your own family for what? To play hero? Your father's an old man who would have been better off in care anyway." "My father," Sarah said quietly, "is 60 years old, in perfect health, and has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body." As they were led out to the police cars, the party guests began to murmur among themselves. Some started making excuses to leave. This level of family drama was more than they'd bargained for at a birthday party. Others lingered, offering awkward condolences and expressions of support that I wasn't sure how to receive. Mrs. Henderson approached me with tears in her eyes. "Robert, I'm so sorry," she said. "If there's anything Harold and I can do..." I nodded and thanked her, but the words felt hollow. What could anyone do? How do you rebuild a life when the foundation has been revealed to be completely rotten? Jim stayed after most of the other guests had left, along with Sarah, Detective Martinez, and Agent Phillips. We sat around my dining room table, the same table where Joyce and Michael had been playing their roles just hours earlier, and went through the evidence Sarah had compiled. The scope of their deception was staggering. They'd been planning this for over a year, starting with small test transactions to see if I'd notice money missing from my accounts. When I didn't, they'd gotten bolder, taking larger amounts and forging documents that would give them legal control over my finances. The nursing home plan was the final phase, Detective Martinez explained, spreading photographs across the table. They'd already put down a deposit at Sunset Manor, telling the staff you were showing signs of dementia and would need full-time care soon. I stared at the photos, pictures of a sterile-looking facility with cheerful marketing language about comprehensive care for seniors with cognitive challenges. They'd actually visited this place, toured the rooms, discussed my care with strangers while planning to steal my life. How much would they have gotten away with? I asked. Agent Phillips consulted his notes. Based on the forged documents we recovered, they would have had access to approximately $475,000 in liquid assets, your savings accounts, money market funds, and easily liquidated investments. The house would have been sold eventually, probably after a year or two in the facility. All told, we estimate they were targeting close to $800,000. $800,000. Nearly my entire net worth, accumulated over 40 years of working, saving, and careful investing. Money I'd planned to use for retirement, for travel with Joyce, for leaving something meaningful to Sarah when I died. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "They'll be charged federally for the financial crimes," Agent Phillips said. "The state will also file charges for elder abuse and fraud. Given the premeditation and the amount of money involved, they're looking at significant prison time if convicted." Prison time. Joyce, who complained when she had to spend a night away from her own bed, might be going to prison. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd been planning to warehouse me in a care facility while potentially facing years behind bars herself. After the officials left, Sarah and I sat alone in the living room. The party decorations were still up. Balloons, streamers, the birthday cake that no one had touched. The normalcy of it all felt obscene after everything that had happened. "I'm sorry, Dad," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "I know this wasn't how you wanted to spend your 60th birthday." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw someone I hadn't fully appreciated before tonight. The careful planning, the months of investigation, the emotional strength it must have taken to watch her own mother and husband conspire against her father and not say anything until she had irrefutable proof. She'd protected me in a way I hadn't even known I needed protecting. "Yo, Sarah," I said, "how long have you known? I mean, really known, not just suspected?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I found Mom's second phone about 4 months ago," she said finally. "She'd left it in Michael's car, and I saw it when I was getting something from the glove compartment." The messages between them went back over a year. Not just the affair, but detailed plans about your finances, conversations about making you seem confused and forgetful, even discussions about which nursing homes had the best reputations, but the least oversight. A year. They'd been planning this for a year, while I'd been obliviously going about my life, trusting them, loving them, believing we were a family. The hardest part, Sarah continued, was pretending everything was normal. Coming to dinner, watching them manipulate you, listening to Michael give you financial advice that was designed to make it easier for him to steal from you. There were so many times I wanted to just scream at them or grab you and tell you everything. But I knew they'd find a way to turn it around. They're both very good at making people doubt their own perceptions. "Why didn't you confront Michael directly? He's your husband." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Was my husband? I filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. My lawyer served him the papers this morning, actually, right before the party. I thought the timing was appropriate." She was divorcing him. Of course she was divorcing him. I felt a surge of pride for my daughter, followed immediately by guilt that she was losing her marriage because of me. "Sarah, I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry that my problems have destroyed your marriage." She turned to look at me, her expression fierce. "Dad, your problems didn't destroy my marriage. Michael destroyed my marriage when he decided to sleep with my mother and steal from my father. You didn't do anything wrong except trust the wrong people." We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the enormity of what had just happened. My wife was in jail. My son-in-law was in jail. My marriage was over. My family, as I'd known it for the past 8 years, had been completely obliterated in the span of a few hours. But strangely, I didn't feel as devastated as I thought I should. Underneath the shock and the betrayal, there was something else. Relief. The constant feeling that something was wrong in my life, the nagging sense that I was missing something important, the growing distance I'd felt from Joyce, and the subtle ways I'd been made to doubt myself. All of that finally made sense. "What happens now?" I asked. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. "Now we figure out how to put your life back together. The real version this time, not the one they were creating for you." As I looked around my living room, my house, my real house that I'd worked for and paid for, and that no one was going to take away from me, I realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I was home. 6 months later, I was sitting on my back porch with my morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. Sarah was inside making breakfast, something that had become our Saturday morning tradition since she'd moved back home temporarily while her divorce was finalized. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Joyce and Michael had both pled guilty to avoid lengthy trials. Joyce to elder abuse and conspiracy charges, Michael to financial fraud and identity theft. Joyce received 3 years in state prison, while Michael got 5 years in federal prison for the more serious financial crimes. They would both be required to pay full restitution, though the chances of recovering all the stolen money were slim. I'd been surprised by how little satisfaction their sentencing gave me. I'd expected to feel vindicated, maybe even triumphant, but mostly I just felt tired. Tired of thinking about them, tired of reliving the betrayal, tired of letting their actions continue to control my emotional state. At some point during those 6 months, I'd made a conscious decision to stop giving them space in my head. The divorce had been surprisingly straightforward once the criminal charges were filed. Joyce's attorney had advised her to cooperate fully, and she'd signed away any claim to marital assets without contest. The house was mine, the remaining savings were mine, and my future was entirely my own for the first time in 25 years. "Dad," Sarah called from the kitchen, "breakfast is ready." I walked inside to find the dining room table set for two with fresh flowers from my garden, another new hobby I'd discovered in retirement. Sarah had made blueberry pancakes, my favorite, and there was a pot of good coffee brewing. These simple Saturday mornings had become precious to me, a weekly reminder of what family was supposed to feel like. "Any word from the attorney about the restitution?" Sarah asked as we sat down to eat. I nodded, cutting into my pancakes. Michael's assets covered about $32,000. Joyce's jewelry and the contents of her personal accounts brought in another $8,000. I'll probably recover about half of what they stole, which is better than I expected. "And the rest?" I shrugged. "The rest is gone, and I'm okay with that. I have more than enough to live comfortably, and honestly, I'd rather lose the money than spend more time thinking about them or fighting over it." Sarah studied my face. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," I said, and I realized it was completely true. For months before all this came out, I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't understand why Joyce was so distant, why you seemed worried about me all the time, why I felt like a stranger in my own house. Now I know it wasn't my imagination. And that's worth more than any amount of money they could pay back. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Sarah had been healing too, in her own way. The divorce proceedings had been difficult, but she'd thrown herself into building a new life with the same methodical determination she'd used to investigate Michael and Joyce's crimes. She'd bought a small house about 15 minutes away and was dating a kind man named David, who worked as a veterinarian and treated her with the respect she deserved. "I have some news," she said, setting down her fork. "David asked me to move in with him." I felt a pang of something, not quite sadness, but nostalgia for these Saturday mornings that had become such an important part of my healing process. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. How do you feel about it?" "Scared," she admitted with a laugh. "But good scared, you know? Like when you're about to try something new that might be amazing." I never felt that way with Michael, even in the beginning. Everything with him felt calculated, like he was always evaluating whether I was worth the effort. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're worth every effort, Sarah. David's a lucky man." "I'm going to miss this," she said, gesturing around the dining room. Our Saturday mornings, having coffee together, talking about everything and nothing. Who says we have to stop? David's welcome here any time, and I expect to see you both regularly. This will always be your home. After breakfast, we walked through the neighborhood together, something else that had become part of our routine. The exercise was good for both of us, but more importantly, it gave us uninterrupted time to talk. Today, our conversation drifted to my own romantic future, a topic Sarah had been gently encouraging me to consider. "Have you given any more thought to calling Margaret?" she asked. Margaret was a widow I'd met at the library 3 weeks earlier. We'd struck up a conversation about a book we'd both been reaching for, and she'd mentioned that she was part of a hiking group that met every Sunday. She'd invited me to join them, and I'd been finding excuses not to go ever since. "I don't know," I said. "It feels strange, thinking about dating after everything that happened. Dad, you're 60 years old, not 90. You deserve companionship, maybe even love again. Not everyone is like Joyce and Michael." She was right, of course, but 25 years of marriage, even a marriage built on lies toward the end, had left me uncertain about my ability to judge character. How could I trust my instincts about someone new when I'd been so completely wrong about the people closest to me? What if I can't tell the difference between genuine affection and manipulation? I asked. What if I'm just naive and trusting, and someone else takes advantage of that? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face me. Dad, you weren't naive or stupid. You were a good husband who loved his wife and trusted his family. Joyce and Michael are skilled manipulators. They had practice, they had time to study you, and they used your own kindness against you. That doesn't mean you're incapable of having healthy relationships. When we got back to the house, I found myself looking at Margaret's business card, which I'd tucked into the frame of the hallway mirror weeks ago. She'd written her phone number on the back, along with the hiking group's meeting time. Before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up the phone and dialed. Margaret, this is Robert Holloway from the library, about that hiking group you mentioned. An hour later, I had plans to meet the hiking group the following Sunday, and possibly to have coffee with Margaret afterward, if the group activity went well. It felt terrifying and exciting at the same time, like Sarah had said. Good scared. That evening, as Sarah packed the last of her belongings to take to David's house, I realized how much my life had changed in 6 months. I was living alone for the first time since my 20s, but I wasn't lonely. I'd joined the hiking group, started taking photography classes at the community college, and even begun volunteering at the local legal aid clinic, helping other seniors who'd been victims of financial fraud. I'm proud of you, Dad, Sarah said as she loaded her final box into her car, not just for getting through all this, but for building something new. You're happier now than you've been in years. She was right. Despite everything I'd lost, my marriage, my trust in people I'd loved, my sense of security in my own judgment, I was happier. I felt like myself again, maybe for the first time in years. The constant low-level anxiety that had been my companion during those final months with Joyce was gone, replaced by a sense of possibility and freedom I hadn't experienced since I was young. As I watched Sarah drive away to start this new chapter of her life, I felt nothing but gratitude for the daughter who'd saved me from a fate I'd been too trusting to see coming. She'd protected me, fought for me, and helped me reclaim my life when I didn't even know it was in danger. I walked back into my house, my real house, the one I'd earned and paid for, and that truly belonged to me, and poured myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow I would call Jim about reducing my hours at the law firm so I could spend more time on photography and volunteering. Next week I would go hiking with Margaret and her friends. Next month I would take that photography workshop in Colorado I'd been considering. For the first time in years, my future felt like it belonged to me, filled with choices I was free to make without manipulation or hidden agendas. I thought about Joyce and Michael occasionally, but they felt like characters from someone else's story now, people who'd briefly intersected with my life but were no longer relevant to who I was becoming. I raised my wine glass to the empty house and said quietly, "Happy birthday, Robert. Here's to 60 and all the years ahead." Outside, the sun was setting, painting my backyard in golden light. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new adventures, new chances to build authentic relationships with people who saw me for who I really was. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood or legal documents. It's about people who protect you, support you, and love you for who you are rather than what you can provide. I had that kind of family in Sarah, and I was finally free to find more of it. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of my world 6 months ago had actually been the beginning of my real life. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely excited to see what came next.